So we're here with Jeremy today, and he is from Focus Bear, and he's going to talk to us about brains and thoughts and how they all come together and ways you can help yourself out even if you aren't neurodivergent or if you are neurodivergent, right? Like how do most brains work and how do we help them is Jeremy's deal. Jeremy,
Hmm.
hello.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes, it's good to have you here.
Hmm. Yeah, how brains work. I don't think I understand how most people's brains work, but I have some ideas on how, especially people with autism and ADHD, how their brains might differ and what things are easy for people like me and what things are very hard.
You mentioned that you just got back from China.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah,
How was the China?
it was a special trip. My wife is from Guangzhou in China,
Mm.
and we've been there a couple of times. We actually got married in China as one of our four wedding ceremonies just before COVID, and we hadn't been back for a couple of years. So it was nice to be back. An important time to go back because her grandmother died earlier this year, and she
Oh,
wasn't able to be there for the funeral due to the restrictions at the time. But it was special to be able to be there and see her other grandparents and be around her family.
that's really important.
Mm.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. So if there's some jet lag going on, huh?
Yeah, a little bit. It's not a huge time difference, but even 3 hours difference does make a little bit of a disconcerting experience coming back.
It does. It does.
Mhm.
So how, as
Mm.
you as a person who works with brains, what do you say about the jet lags?
How jet lag affects us. I think what is interesting is we've got actual jet lag where you go traveling and then it makes it harder to get back into the normal regime. And for example, I on Tuesday when I got back, I had a 4 hour long meeting to greet me
Oh,
when I got back, and I fell
yeah.
asleep after 2 hours, which may have happened anyway because it was a very long and boring meeting. But I think I would have coped better had I been in the right time zone. So I think everyone has experienced that, and that's fairly obvious that it can be more challenging. And I guess the recommendation is to follow your normal routine and try and stay up as late as you can and try and fall asleep at the regular time. And there's some advice around when you wake up, try and get exposed to natural light as soon as possible, get into the normal biorhythms that you would have in the location in terms
Right.
of eating at the regular time, exercising at the regular time, natural light at the regular time. All of that's meant to help. I am feeling more in my normal time zone a couple of days later. But then the other thing is there's social jet lag where due to the allure of technology and our modern day life, we can essentially create jet lag symptoms by just going to bed really late and then not being in kilter with how society's rhythms are in the time zone where we live. And that's something that definitely used to happen to me a lot, that I would say keep working until 1 a.m. and then I've got a 8 a.m. meeting. And if I wake up at 7 a.m. after 6 hours sleep, I'm not actually able to function that well. And some people call that social jet lag, where maybe it's not work, maybe it's watching Netflix late into the evening, but it
Mm.
creates delayed sleep phase syndrome, where you're not sleeping at a time that you probably should be, and then it
Right.
makes everything else harder.
Yeah, I could totally see that. That's fascinating.
Mm.
And that's actually not jet lag, but it is. And it's something we create, right? Because you're not getting on
Mm.
a plane to create that. You're just
Mm.
making choices.
Yeah,
I have a
yeah.
friend who calls that revenge procrastination.
Revenge
Like,
bedtime procrastination.
like, um, so if I were working in a 9 to 5 job or an 8 to 4:30 job, and
Mm.
I finally get home at the end of the day and I have time for me, and I choose
Mm.
to make decisions that are for me, which means I gave 8.5 hours of my day to
Mm.
an organization, And now when I come home, I have to make dinner and I have to clean up dinner and I do all of these things, but that isn't time for Kim. But I want to
Mm.
take time for Kim. So that means instead of going to bed at like 9:30 when I should, I decide to stay
Mm.
up and like read, or, maybe I do something I really want to do. And I put off going to bed because I want to take back time for me. And
Mm.
then it's like revenge. I'm getting revenge on, it's actually yourself. It's nobody else that hurts from this but yourself. But like,
Mm.
because the organization that I worked for has taken so much of my time that day, I'm going to do stuff for me now. And then
Mm.
you wind up going to bed really late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very understandable, but regrettable. I've definitely done that many times myself as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
So what are
Yeah,
some
and
things that you do to help out your brain?
one of the things I do in this particular context is I don't let my tired brain make decisions, especially around how I use technology, because that tends to be the biggest issue for me, that if I have unfettered access to my laptop and phone, then I'm going to make dumb decisions and I'll keep on looking at things late at night and they'll seem important in the moment, but an outside observer would say, this doesn't really make sense. This could wait until tomorrow. Why are you doing it now? And
Right.
for that reason, I've set up my computer in a way that, thanks to Focus Bear, I can't use it after 8:30 at night, that I have to get my wife to grant access. If there is an emergency, she'll come and put the password in if I convince her that it is a real emergency. And if it's not, then I don't have access to my computer. And somehow just locking myself out makes it easier for me to do the things that are maybe a little bit trickier. Things like, as you said, cleaning up after dinner and doing some yoga, doing some self-care practices away from screens that are actually really nourishing for me and mean that when I get into bed, my mind isn't racing with the unprocessed thoughts of my email inbox, but instead I am calm and centered and I fall asleep very quickly.
That's lovely.
Mm. So
And
that's one thing.
was that hard to do psychologically? To be like, you know what? I'm gonna put a password on my computer that somebody else has to access.
It was hard, but I did it in increments. So I initially began with my computer locking out at 9:30 p.m. at night, and I would literally be working right up until 9:30. I recognized that that wasn't healthy, that it wasn't good for my physical health, for my mental health, or my relationship with my wife. And I made it 9:15. And gradually, over time, I've been pushing it back. Now it actually starts at 4 p.m. I do my 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. work in my day job. And then after that, the rest of my evening or afternoon is quite structured in the sense that after 4 p.m., my first task is to spend 15 minutes cleaning up the house. And then I do some planning for the following day where my computer unlocks my calendar and my to-do list that other apps are not allowed. And
Oh, okay.
I make dinner, I do some Chinese study, I do some journaling, do some yoga, a bunch of different activities that I do that are quite structured. And then by 8:30, I'm done. I'm pretty happy at that point to just do my yoga and start winding down for bed, have my shower and get into bed.
Right.
Hmm.
That's actually
And
rather
just
wonderful.
oh, you go.
No, go ahead.
The incremental approach to it is what allowed me to do it psychologically because I had I had a lot of fear that I felt that I had so much work to do that it would be impossible for me to shut down earlier.
Right.
And gradually over time, I built up evidence that that wasn't the case, that things didn't catch on fire because I stopped at 9:15, nor did they catch on fire when I stopped at 8:30. And maybe they would have if I had immediately gone from 9:30 to 5 p.m. because I had a lot of commitments and my team wasn't in a place to take over the commitments that I had. But I've progressively been handing over responsibility to other people and backing out of some commitments that weren't necessary. And now it is possible for me to finish at a more reasonable time.
Fascinating.
Hmm.
And so you went from 9:30 to 9:15, and then from 9:15 down to 8:30?
Yeah, and then gradually in increments to 4 p.m. because I start my day pretty early. I start working often 6:30 a.m. or earlier.
Okay.
So by 4 p.m. I've well and truly done a full day's work.
That makes total sense.
Hmm.
And then your evenings probably look incredibly different now than they did before.
Yeah, I have basically 2 hours of eating dinner and going for a walk with my wife and cleaning up afterwards. That's a really nice time. We often go to the beach and look at the sunset in the evening,
Oh,
which
that is
is,
lovely.
yeah, I think good for the brain, good for the body, and good for our relationship.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Hmm. Yeah.
So what else would you like to share while you're here?
I'd like to share, in terms of your opening remark about understanding of brains, I'd like to talk about what it's like having ADHD and autism and what is challenging in society and what can be made easier.
Yes, please.
So some of the challenges are, for me personally, and I mean, a lot of autistic and ADHD people will have the same feeling. Some people will be different, some people will be similar. But some of the hard things are, especially for autistic people like myself, there can be real challenges around intensive social activity that if I'm around more than about 3 people, it becomes very challenging for me to keep up with the conversation. And I experienced that a lot in high school, that we'd have 10 people standing around and everyone is trying to be witty and make certain remarks and come in with a funny comeback. And I couldn't really do that. It felt like my brain was a couple of seconds behind other people.
Mhm.
And I've recognized that even today in a work context where it's less about being witty and more about brainstorming together, it's still pretty challenging for me if it's a large group. I can do very well with one-on-one or with 2 people, but more than that becomes very challenging. And I've now developed coping strategies around that I just request that if we're in a very large group, that we break into breakout rooms. And I find the conversation is a lot more engaging for me and I'm able to hear it better. And I think it's better for other people as well. A lot of the accommodations, for example, another common one is background noise, that if you're working in an office, in an open plan office where everyone is talking and maybe there's harsh lighting and a lot of background noise and some uncomfortable chairs, that's very hard for me to concentrate in that scenario. Very difficult for me, slightly difficult for neurotypical people. But if it's changed in a way that people don't talk in an environment where other people are concentrating, I think that helps everyone. And
I
many
totally
of
see that.
the other accommodations, yeah, they're similar. They help everyone.
Right.
Hmm.
I work in a group office, and sometimes I just like sit there and type what I have to type by talking out loud to myself, because I'm like, there's so much chatter going on behind me that I'm just like
Hmm.
gonna sit here, and if I talk to myself, then I'm able to focus more.
Hmm. Yeah, I can
Which
see
means
how that would help.
I'm making noise too, right? So it means if somebody else is trying to do work and there's a person talking on the phone, there's a person having a conversation with somebody else that's in the room, and then I'm sitting there typing, if somebody else is trying to get anything done, I don't know how their brain would focus.
Yeah. Becomes a bit of an arms race, everyone using their own strategies that may affect other people.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm. Yeah, and I have strategies as well around, it's called stimming, where, like, for example, I'm playing with a highlighter right now, which
Mm.
helps me to concentrate. But at times when I'm on a video call, I've also got a elliptical trainer under my desk, and I can be sitting here and I think it's not obvious that I am currently pedaling on my trainer. It's very quiet and my body doesn't move that much. I used to have a swivelly chair, and as I was using it, my chair would rotate around, but now I've got a fixed chair. And doing something like that where my body is involved helps me to concentrate better. So there are some hacks like that in an office, it might be distracting for other people. If I'm sitting there and I'm playing with my pen, then that might annoy other people. But there are things, especially if I'm working from home, that I can do that make it much better for me and they don't really affect other people. And the best thing is if I'm just in a conversation where I'm heavily involved, where I'm talking and having to listen a lot, then I don't need to do those things. But if I'm in a meeting with 10 people and it's really boring and I'm not that involved, then I have these tactics. I've got various sensory toys that I can play with to help me to stay focused.
Did your elliptical under the desk help you on Tuesday when you came back with the jet lag? Or was that like you were just so tired it didn't even matter?
I was so tired. I was lying on my couch listening to the meeting. I didn't have the energy to sit up in a chair. And then I fell asleep after 2 hours.
I used to have an office, like an office. And now I'm just like in my kitchen at the moment. But like I used to have an office. And when I had an office, it was in a school. I used a yoga ball, like one of the big yoga balls. I used one of those as a chair. Sometimes the kids wanted to use it as a chair, and then I would sit in another chair that I had in the office. But otherwise, I sat on the yoga ball. And sometimes in meetings, when things would get a little dull, I would bounce on the yoga ball so that you would see me doing this, like on the screen. I'd be bouncing up and down. And it was also like, it was a way of using my core all the time. So it's sort of like your elliptical where you have it under the desk and you're pedaling. Now, do you have resistance on it at all?
Yeah, I can increase the resistance level. I normally have it on quite a low level because if I have it on a higher level, I actually have to really use my legs a bit more, and I think it's a bit more obvious, and it's also harder to concentrate.
Oh, I can see that.
Low level of resistance is helpful. It's a bit like I was thinking about getting a treadmill desk, but it's a bit more expensive to get a treadmill desk. I'd have to change the desk that I have to make it a standing desk. Whereas I've been able to retain my current desk with the elliptical trainer. And I think it's also more distracting for other people that I'd be moving around. And even though I think I like the act of walking more than pedaling, I actually quite enjoy the pedaling side of it.
And then what have you thought about one of those balance boards? Have you seen them? They're like long, and then they have like a ball kind of thing underneath, and then you stand on it, and then it can like, so you spend your time like just trying to keep your balance while you're doing a standing desk.
Yeah, I do have one of those in a box somewhere. I used it because my physical therapist was encouraging me to do that for ankle rehab, but I haven't used it for a while. I probably should go back to it because that's actually one intervention that is meant to be really good for people with ADHD. That there's some evidence that the cerebellum is affected in ADHD, which not only affects physical balance, but also affects coordination of attention. So I should probably get back into it. What I prefer doing in terms of balance exercises is I really like doing cross-country skiing, which is possible to do probably nearly this time of year in the US, but in Australia, where it's coming into summer, I can't really go skiing, but I do have roller skis, so I can go out and do that. And I do find after I go for a roller ski that I feel really good and my brain feels centered, and it's easier for me to concentrate afterwards.
Well, that makes total sense too. Yeah, I wonder if like the balance, because they say in classrooms, if you give children who are struggling with attention concerns, if you put them on a balance ball, the sitting on the ball is enough to keep them at the desk and concentrating. Although there will be moments, I mean, if you give a child a ball, right, you know it's going to happen and you have to deal with those moments, right? But for the most part, you're like, this is your seat and you must sit on it, right? Like,
What's going to happen? Are they going to throw the
The
large yoga
ball.
ball at someone else?
Yeah, they'll throw the ball or they'll bounce on it or they'll like use it to bounce around the room, right? These things happen, but the same thing happens in it, not that they throw the chair, but like, the same sort of thing, like, this is your equivalent of your chair. So please don't, treat it in any way that you wouldn't treat your chair.
Hmm.
But, kids are kids.
Yeah. I always used to rock back on my chair and nearly fall off.
And then that doesn't happen either if you put them in a balance ball. If you put them on a balance
Hmm.
ball, if you lean back, you're leaning back. And then if you slip off the back of it, that's on you, right? Like the whole point is to be balanced. And it's the same thing that you're talking about using the cerebellum to like get yourself in a position where you're actually centered and then able to work. And then you have to hold your
Hmm.
core like that. So your core
Hmm.
is engaged the entire time, the way that it
Hmm.
would be if you were standing on one of the balance boards.
Hmm. Do kids these days get much exercise, opportunities to run around in the playground, or is it too structured now and they don't really get to release their energy?
It depends on how old they are, but once they hit sixth grade, which is basically 11 or 12 years old, the answer to that question is
Hmm. Hmm.
you get gym class,
Hmm.
but
Which is once per week.
no, it could be as much, well, it depends. So there's
Hmm.
like a rotation that they do. So you'll have it every day while you're rotated into it,
Oh,
but it's
okay.
possible that like once that rotation leaves, then you go to home ec. And no, you don't like you go to
Hmm.
sorry, it's not home ec anymore. It's family consumer science. Um
Okay.
once you're out of that rotation, then you don't get gym anymore. So like you only
Hmm.
get gym for like a third of the year,
Hmm.
depending on how long you're in there.
Hmm.
And so that's sort of a bummer for students because no, unless you have gym, there's no running around. I mean, there is the like a lot of students are involved in sports
Hmm.
and travel sports and team and school sports, but not everybody, right? There are people who are
Hmm.
like, I'm not a sports person, I'm more of a theater person, but then let me tell you, they're not necessarily running around a gym either. Like
Hmm.
there are some people who are just like, no, 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 no.
Hmm. Yeah. Because that's probably an issue for learning that if
Mm,
they're cooped up inside all day, then it's harder to concentrate.
absolutely. And
Mm,
I mean, there are, so we know, I think it's Eric Erickson. I could be wrong on the name, but the learning styles, right? You've got your learning styles, and there's like the visual, the kinesthetic, the auditory, are your
mm,
three basics. But then they've like expanded them beyond that to like be people who are nature. And like if
mm,
they're out in nature and they're spending time in nature, then they're going to learn better than the people who aren't out in nature.
mm,
Like if their learning style is one, right? Like if, there are kids, that whole idea of like, let's have class outside. When I was
mm.
teaching, I had a colleague who would like, sometimes if I gave her a really hard time at lunch and she wanted to get back at me, she would come and stand in my classroom door and go, Ms. Beam, let's have class outside. And then all the students would be like, oh, and I would just be like, I deserve that. Like I did give you a really hard time at lunch. I did deserve that. But then I'll look at the students and be like, no class outside. So,
Have you tried it? I wonder what it's like to do
oh,
class
class
outside.
class outside, some kids are really, really great at it and they really
Mm,
appreciate it and they get really right to work and they like focus more because they've got the air and the, you know, the one, there's
mm,
the walk to outside, and two, then there's the
mm,
settling into the space outside, and then three, there's like the space outside is what they need, and so they focus right in. And there are other kids
mm,
who are like, we're not in a structure, whee! And then poof.
mm.
Yeah,
And then you don't see them again until the end of class.
exactly. You're like, no, you have parameters about where they can be outside, but
Okay.
yeah, no, there's parameters. Like you have, if you can't see me, then you're it's a problem.
Mm.
And I also, when I would often do it with creative writing class, I would like,
Oh
because it's
yeah.
creative writing class. So I'd be like, well, yeah, let's go outside and have creative writing. I'm totally fine with that. We'll be creative and outside at the same time. Um,
Mm,
and I always did a daily check-in with every student in creative writing. So if they wandered away, I'd be like, you didn't check in with me, which means you violated no outside for you, no outside anymore, because that person violated, and nobody wanted to be that person, so they followed the rules.
Right. Collective punishment.
Exactly.
That sounds like a really nice way to do it. Did they get clipboards so they could still write while they're outside?
Yeah, and they had like binders. They would like lean on their binders, or they would like write. We were in a school that everybody had laptops, so they would just like lean on their stuff and write. They didn't necessarily need a desk. I mean, very often kids didn't write on the desktop. They would like lean back, as you know, they would lean back in their chair with a textbook in front of them, and then they would write on the textbook. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, right. Not that they would write on it. They would use a textbook to lean on as they were writing on their paper.
Yeah, okay.
Which is something you're probably not unfamiliar with.
Yeah. Yep, definitely leaning back is something that I've done. And I really enjoy doing walking meetings, which is a way of me being outside and working. Don't think I was allowed to do that in school, but it's something that I find helpful. If I'm mainly just listening and I can have my camera off, then I'll just go outside, have the headphones in, listen to the meeting, and hopefully it's not too obvious if there are lots of birds chirping if I'm asked to speak.
Yeah, there was one time I took a meeting while I was walking. There were neighbors yelling at each other across the street, and I was like, and they were like, what is that? And I was like, sorry, that's me. Like, I'll just mute myself. But I like the idea of taking a meeting for a walking meeting. And I like that idea, like regularly, right? If you're meeting somebody and you know how like you go to the coffee shop and you sit down and you drink the coffee. And I'm not a coffee drinker, and I'm becoming not a tea drinker, which is really bizarre for me. I'm in like this weird moment where I'm like just drinking. It's changed for me, but I'm just like just drinking hot water. So, which is very bizarre. I'm sort of like, who are you at the moment? Looking at myself. But at that point, like, what am I gonna do? Walk into a coffee shop and be like, oh, I'm gonna sit here for 2 hours and I'm gonna drink only hot water. So, I like the idea of a walking meeting, right? Where you meet up somewhere and you just like walk while you're having your meeting. That makes me really happy.
Yeah, I've done that quite a few times. It's good from an autistic perspective as well, because there's not a requirement to make eye contact, that you're walking side by side. Yeah. You can have a nice conversation without having to stare at each other the whole time.
No, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share? Is there anything else you want to talk about that you think is really important for people to understand?
The other thing would be, for people with ADHD, one other accommodation. We've spoken about difficulties paying attention and some of the strategies around that in terms of reducing sensory overload, making the work more interesting by, for example, doing breakout rooms. Some other ideas around that. One framework that I like in terms of understanding what makes the ADHD mind tick is the concept of interest-based attention. And it's also common for people with autism as well, that there are some things where if you give me a task that involves creativity or involves novelty, then I love that. And I'm likely to keep working on that until very late at night if I'm not restrained. And that's something that I think is quite common, and something that workplaces can take into account, and also individuals can take into account, that often there's a way to take a boring task and to inject some creativity or inject some novelty into it. As an example, I often have to write business cases for work, and I find that really dull if I follow the template. The template is very structured and it feels very repetitive, because I've already done about 25 of them, and doing number 26 just makes me not want to do it at all. But what I've found makes it more fun is I'll try and do things like I'll inject funny side jokes into it, that where I have to give examples of what type of SMS messages people might be sending. I'll create a funny dialogue in there, and that adding that little dose of creativity and humor in there makes it a much more fun exercise, and I'm almost giggling as I'm going about it. And I think my boss actually enjoys it as well. makes it more more fun for other people to read as well. So if there's some way to structure the work where it's not as repetitive and there's some creative license available, and that might feel like it's impossible, but I think there's often little opportunities for rebellion where even if you're meant to do it by the book, you can slightly tweak it and make it more fun. And the other strategy that can be really effective is body doubling. Have you heard of that term before?
No.
I hadn't heard of it either when I first found out about ADHD and my own diagnosis, but it made me think of when you have a president who's in danger of being assassinated and he'll have a body double who will be there ready to take a bullet for him. It's a little bit different from that, but the idea is that if I'm doing something really dull and boring, it's likely that I'll get distracted. But if someone is sitting next to me and I'm saying to them, hey, I want to work on this for the next 20 minutes. Would you mind helping me look at it? And they're not necessarily having to be an expert in it or actually help, but they're just there as a witness. And the best form is if we're actually working on it together, and where in the tech industry, pair programming is a common thing where two people are looking at the same screen and we're working on it together. That's
Right.
not always possible, but even something where they're sitting close by and I might tell them, hey, I'm going to work on this for the next half an hour. And they'll say, I'm going to work on this. And then we check in after half an hour. That can
Right.
be really helpful. Just that the idea that they might look at my screen at any moment. And if I'm on Reddit, then they're going to be like, hey, but you said you were meant to be working on that business case. What's happening? That the experience of being watched is very helpful for productivity.
Right.
As long as it's being watched in the right way, it's me voluntarily asking for someone to watch me and not a feeling of being surveilled.
Right. 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 No, that makes total sense.
Mm.
It's like
You
with
can,
permission versus with permission,
mm,
for the purpose of focus, opposed
mm,
to against your will for the purpose of discipline.
mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can see the
Yeah.
difference.
And there are online platforms where you can do it as well. There's Focusmate and Cave Day where you can sign up online and you'll do a Zoom call, and similar kind of experience that you start with a minute of saying, this is what I want to work on for the next half an hour.
Mhm.
And then you're not sharing screens or anything, but at the end of the half an hour, you check back in and say, this is what I achieved.
Mm.
And if you didn't achieve anything, then you either have to lie or get accountable.
Yeah. Is there ever like consequences for not fulfilling your requirement on one of those?
Yeah, the ground opens up underneath you and you get sucked into the Mordor.
So
No, that,
there was this girl who did this challenge for
hmm,
I think a year, and it was called Songs from a Hat.
hmm,
And she had to produce a song. So all of the I think she had somebody else in her life take, maybe she did, the ideas that were sent to her for song ideas, and they were like put on little strips of paper and they put them in a hat. And I think it was just
hmm,
a beanie hat. I don't think it was a fancy hat. And she just
hmm,
like would pick one out every week, and she would have to write a song about that topic of whatever was on that little strip of paper. And she
hmm,
said if she didn't get the song posted by midnight on Sunday night, then she
hmm.
had to eat everything in her pantry.
What?
So mustard, ketchup, right? Like everything that was in there, like the entire jar of it too, not just
Oh no.
like if boxes of cereal, whatever was in her pantry, she had to like consume the entire thing, which was
Ooh.
which I think she missed once and actually had to do it.
Oh no.
Like, I wonder if there was something like that, like where, you know what, if you don't use your half an hour the way that you say you do, that means you have to go run around the block 10 times, right? Like if there's some sort of penalty
Hmm,
for not just accountability and you lie about it. I mean, how is he going to double check, or how is she going to double check you did the thing or not, right? Like how is that really going to happen? But at the same
hmm,
point, like I think the added ante of
Mm.
not just accountability, but where somebody's going to watch over whether or not you do it, but then also the like, if I don't, this is the consequence.
Yeah, it sounds similar to the concept of commitment contracts, where
Oh yeah.
you either write it out or you say it verbally that there'll be some kind of penalty if you don't do it. And I have tried that in the past with an app called Stick, Stickk, where you can have someone else be a witness to your contract. For
Okay.
example, I was doing it around meditation, that if I didn't meditate for 20 minutes, then I was going to have to donate a certain amount of money to a presidential candidate that I don't agree with their politics, to an
Oh,
anti-charity. So
yes.
it's a strong motivation. I think the
Yeah.
eating ketchup and mustard is probably a similar kind of visceral reaction to the
Uh-huh.
idea.
Yeah, I actually
It,
had a coach do that with me too. That I had
mm,
there was something she wanted me to accomplish and or something I wanted to accomplish. She asked me what I wanted to be held accountable for. And I told her something
mm,
I wanted to be held accountable for. And she said, I want it in my email by we set the deadline. And she said, and if you don't, I need a screenshot that you sent the Proud Boys money for
mhm,
their meetings. And the Proud Boys were the people who were a part of the Capitol
mhm.
on January 6th here in the United States.
Yeah.
It was like, I can't send them money. Like that's just not even acceptable in my world. And she was like, okay, you're gonna
Mm.
send the Proud Boys money if you don't get this thing done. And I was like, that thing became top priority. I was like, I'm getting this done.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be very effective. I stopped doing it after a while because I felt that it was creating a lot of stress and pressure in my life that I didn't actually want. And
Mm.
I've adopted instead the concept of tiny habits, that if it's hard for me to do that 20 minutes of meditation, then that's a sign that it's actually something that I need to restructure.
Oh yeah.
And so now the approach that I have is, if there's something that I want to do and there's this big audacious goal that I want to achieve, I don't go for that initially. I go for a smaller goal initially, like with the bedtime, not going immediately from 9:30, cutting off the computer, but instead gradually making changes. And I've done it with other things, meditation, instead of what was unrealistic for me at the time of doing 20 minutes every day. I started with 2 minutes and I
Yeah.
gradually increased it from 2 minutes to 3 minutes. And now I'm up to 20 minutes, but it doesn't feel hard. Whereas in the past, it felt really impossible and a massive effort, and something that I didn't enjoy doing, that I had to have the external pressure in order to do it. And
Yeah,
that
yeah.
then means if the pressure is ever removed or the person doesn't watch me, that I'm not going to do it, because it feels like I took something which could have been an enjoyable activity and made it into something that I had to be compelled with great force to do.
Right, right, right. No, that makes total sense. I like the
Mm.
idea of like realizing that if you're having a problem doing it, the structure of it is a problem.
Mm. Yeah.
And being kind to you instead of forcing the issue, just being kind
Mm.
to yourself and saying, you know what, this is a problem. How do I change this so it's more kind
Mm.
and less demanding?
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be giving up the goal completely, but just recognizing that at this time in my life, for example, at the start of 2022, I was really going through a tough time work-wise, where I had essentially 3 jobs at the same time, and I wasn't sleeping much, and I wasn't meditating, I wasn't exercising, and I
Right.
knew that would help, but it felt impossible. The idea of going to what I had been doing previously, I had been doing normally half an hour of exercise and a decent amount of meditation, but I didn't want to give up on that completely, but I knew I couldn't do the full extent that I wanted to do.
Right.
So I just did 5 minutes of both. And that that made it a difference. It's better than zero. I think that's a key philosophy, that anything is better than zero. So even if the full amount can't be done, for example, I these days I'm trying to develop a yoga in the evening habit, and I'm finding it hard, but I do 2 minutes, and 2 minutes of doing one sun salutation and one downward dog, that that's better than nothing. I go to sleep feeling a little bit more relaxed. And over
Yeah.
time, I hope to build it up to 10 minutes.
That's actually brilliant because I want to do yoga in the house and I never do it. I never do it. And because I just don't. Um, something I have been doing, there's a number of Ayurvedic practices that I had been involved in and doing a ton of them. And I recently talked to the Ayurvedic doctor and she was like, listen, I know you dropped this off and you dropped that off and you dropped this off. I want you to bring these two things back in and this is how you're going to do it. The one I keep forgetting I'm supposed to do, it's a morning thing. And in the morning, my brain, I just haven't engaged it. And maybe now that we're talking about it, I'll stick it on a Post-it note and stick it on the cabinet so that I remember to do it while I'm in the kitchen until it becomes a habit. And then I can take the Post-it note off it literally takes 3 minutes and it's an Agni Sara. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a tightening of the pelvic floor, basically. It's a way of starting up the fire juices of digestion. And you're supposed to do it before you eat. And so it's a morning practice. It lights you up basically. And so I can easily put that as a Post-it note on the kitchen cabinet just to remind myself to do it. But at night, she also asks me to put a sandbag on my belly, a 10-pound sandbag on my belly when I go to bed. Well, she said when I was heating water for the neti pot, but I do something different for heating water for the neti pot. So I put the 10-pound sandbag on my belly and I crawl into bed. Well, I crawl into bed and then I like lie on my back and I put the 10-pound sandbag on my belly. And then I like lie there for a while and then I fall asleep.
With the sandbag.
With the sandbag on my belly. And then I wake up a little while later and I'm like, it's been more than 2 minutes because I know she only wants me to hold it on there for 2 minutes. And like, I move it over. I move it now. So this morning I found the sandbag next to my head, which meant that at some point I took it off. I picked up a 10-pound sandbag in my sleep and put it next to my head. But I'm completing the practice. So
love it. Getting some strength training as well.
Exactly. There are some nights where I'm just like, like get this off of me. Yeah. I definitely, yeah.
And that approach sounds a bit similar to habit stacking, where you're linking it to something that you would normally do as well.
Yeah.
Yes, she was suggesting that with the neti pot heating, and you've linked it to going to sleep.
Going to sleep. Yeah. We were talking about how I have my distilled water on my bathroom floor. And so it's cold when it goes up the nose. And she was like, yeah, that's not good. She was like, that's too jarring and too uncomfortable. And that's not really good practice. So please don't do that. She's like, how about you heat up the hot water on the stove? And then once it's nice and boiling, you like, while you're waiting for the water to boil, you like do your sandbag breathing for, 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is. And I was like, I could do that. And then I got home and I was like, I have one of those water purifier things, like where you have the spring water that comes in the 5-gallon jug and then you like press the button and you get cold water, you press the button and you get hot water, right? Magic hot water, it just like appears. So I was like, why don't I just take the hot water out of there?
Yeah.
And shove
that sounds easier.
Yeah, and take the hot water out of there and then add the distilled water that's cold to make it some temperature that's better for the nose. That way it's not freezing from being on the bathroom floor and it's not boiling as it goes up your nose. Like, can we just like figure out where that level is in the neti pot? And so now that's what I do. So I'm not actually boiling the water. So I had to figure out another time to do the sandbag.
Love it. How do you do the salt aspect of your neti pot? Do you manually put salt in or do you use the sachets?
No, so like there's it's really funny that you asked this question. So there's the retreat center where this Ayurvedic doctor works is is called the Himalayan Institute. And they have a whole line of neti products, including neti salt. and it comes in a little tub. They no
Mm,
longer own it. They still have their trademark on it, but they no longer own
mm,
it. And it's a white tub, and then you unscrew it, and then there's like a little measuring spoon in there, and I just drop it in.
mm.
Although one night I
And just did
forgot the
water.
salt, and I just did water, and I was like, this is terrible. I must have put too much salt in. And then I was like, wait a minute, I didn't put any salt in. I was like, that's really painful. Like I was like burning. I was like, this is so uncomfortable. And I was like, this is
Mm,
why we put the salt in.
mm. Yeah, I wonder if it has bicarb soda in it as well, because I find just salt is also a burning sensation. Maybe
Oh.
the needy salt has a combination, because the sachets I used to, or I have some squeeze bottles
Yeah,
rather
yeah, yeah.
than needy pots, and they come with a sachet, which is a mixture of bicarb because it's meant to buffer out the pH and make it a bit more comfortable. But I don't want to buy the sachets. They feel like an environmental issue.
Yeah, yeah. Um, hold on. I'm hopping onto some website right now just to see if I
Hmm.
can check out the ingredients.
Hmm.
No, it's just salt.
Okay.
Non-iodized pharmaceutical grade sodium chloride. Contains
Right.
no additives or anti-caking agents.
Hmm. Very good. Might have to get some for myself.
Yeah, and it comes in a it also comes in like a refill. So you get the tub that's plastic, but then you can also buy like an eco refill bag
Hmm.
that's just a couple dollars, looks like a couple dollars more and gives you way more because then you're not paying for the tub every time.
Hmm. Makes sense.
Although you do get the scoopy every time. Yeah, you get the scoopy every time. You get every time.
Okay. That sounds important to make sure it's the right amount.
The right amount. Yeah. One time I always use the smaller amount. There's like the scoop is like where the handle is not even. There's like a top amount and then there's like a bottom amount. And the bottom amount is
Hmm.
like double or triple the top amount. Like there's a little
Oh,
bit that
okay.
you use and then there's like a bigger part.
Hmm.
I one time used the bigger part just to see what would happen. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. I'm like, never doing that again.
Yeah. Cool. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a habit that I have been trying to develop and I haven't been doing regularly, mainly because I haven't found it a pleasant experience,
No,
the
it's not
heating
a pleasant
water and the
experience.
but it's definitely good for me because I have dust mite allergies and
Oh,
flushing out the sinuses is very helpful.
yeah. I cut down on doing it. I don't do it every day. I do it the days that I'm at the hospital or I'm like in really crowded situations and there's a lot of
Oh
people
yeah.
around,
Yeah.
then I'll do it. In fact, I didn't do it one day when I had a family gathering and one of the family
Mm,
members had a cold. And
mm,
that family member, this is around Thanksgiving, and that family member wasn't wearing a mask.
mm,
And I was in their space a little bit because I'm like, I work in a hospital, it'll be fine. And I didn't come home and neti pot that night. And then I got
mm.
the cold, and I was like, this is partly on her and partly on me because I
Yeah.
didn't like flush the system.
Mm,
But every time
yeah.
I come home from the hospital, every time I've been in the hospital for any period of time,
Mm,
I just flush the system out because I just don't want anything sticking around.
yeah. You've inspired me. I'm gonna do it tonight. Maybe I'll
Excellent.
do the salt scooping beforehand because that's one thing that can feel a little bit tiresome to do in the evening.
Yeah, I could totally see why that would be the case.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for having me on. I
Yeah, thank
enjoyed
you so
our
much for being here.
conversation.
This has been great. I really
Hmm.
appreciate you being here. I will hit